Hi. How's everyone feeling? Good. You're feeling so good because you moved so much this weekend. Praise God. This has been a treasure of a weekend for me. We started dreaming about this kind of idea probably like 6, 7, 8 months ago now. And I've been working and kind of brainstorming and dreaming about this. And I told my wife after night one, I was like, that was surreal. That felt surreal that like this is really happening at our church or any church at all. Like we're really talking about this stuff that is really important but under discussed. So thank you guys for being a church where that can happen. I'm going to thank you a little more, so don't let me get ahead of myself. Before I thank you, I want to tell you something. I love you. That's important that you hear me say that. It's true. I am not someone who traditionally enjoys stirring the pot. I like being friends. I like making friends and laughing and smiling. Historically, I'm not really one that like enjoys controversy or conflict of any kind. And then I became a worship leader, and now I professionally make people upset. But with utmost sincerity, I have friends who are worship leaders in churches who could share horror stories of how critical people are of them and their jobs and their roles and how much people argue about them and I really honestly genuinely, when I talk about this church to my friends, I tell people that I really don't get a sense of that at all here. I love this church. I feel like this church actually legitimately genuinely loves God. And recognizes the challenges of having an intergenerational congregation. We've had that tonight as we've been led by a younger generation. But on any given Sunday morning, we've got the 80-year-old and the 8-year-old, and they're in the same row, but we're trying to worship the same God. I think that the church recognizes that, and we kind of all rally around it. There's a lot of grace, and there's no praising of preferences. So thank you for being a church that makes my job easy. And I love you. I care about you more than I care about what you'll do with any of this information tonight. That's important. I'm going to give you a lot of my own perspective. I'm going to tell you my story. I'm going to give you some suggestions, but I want you to know there may be opportunity for you to be like mad or upset or whatever, or have your feathers ruffled. I don't think it needs to be that way, but if that happens, I want you to know that I'm not standing up here in any position of judgment, and you shouldn't either. As we walk away from this, I care about you as a person, more than I care about what you're gonna do with this information, okay? That all sound good? Great. Last thing, I'm not a scientist. I'm a follower of Jesus, and all I mean by that is that I am going to talk about science maybe a little. I'm going to throw out some statistics to you, but I'm approaching all of this purely from the perspective of someone who wants to follow Jesus more passionately, not from the perspective of science or any. The goal and the thrust of tonight is I want us to love Jesus more. Make sense? Sound good? All right, let's go. Have you ever considered that the first sin in the Bible had to do with food? Let's think about this for about 20 seconds. Why did it have to do with food? Why couldn't it have been just like the thought of rebelling against God? Or why not just the desire? Why not an expressed a verbally expressed declaration of independence from God? Why did the only command of restraint given by God in the beginning have to do with eating food? Have you ever thought about that before, right now? Why couldn't it have been literally anything else? I think from the beginning, what we can take away maybe from that is that food was always a source of beautiful delight when it was enjoyed and experienced how God created it to be enjoyed and experienced. And from the beginning, it was also a source of horrific rebellion against what God intended. Both those things are present in the very first 3 chapters of the Bible. For me, I understand the latter of that. I've kind of lived it. I understand that food can be a beautiful thing. God created all this food to be experienced and enjoyed, and he said, eat of the plenty. But I also understand that it can be a horrific source of rebellion against what he intended. I've lived that. I want to tell you a little bit about my story. I grew up relatively healthy. My mom was pretty healthy. She was very health conscious, I would say. She was very aware. And my father was healthy by proxy. He cared less than my mom, but my mom cared a lot, so my dad was healthy by proxy, and I was healthy by proxy. I was a healthy in law. I don't know how that works. I grew up going to a small private Christian school all the way up through elementary. And this is important. This is not a judgment on anyone. This is not hyperbole either. I'm not exaggerating. As I grew up in elementary school, every single one of my friends was overweight. And that's important for me to mention as part of this story because I was not, and I really early on was just different than everybody else around me. Consequently, jokes were pretty frequently made on my expense. Sometimes by my friends, and then also by adults. It's stuff like, oh, you can have more. You need to put some meat on those bones, that kind of. And then like, ha 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 ha. Don't do that. That's not funny. Also, you're communicating to a kid that something is wrong with them in a way that's actually not helpful at all. So I had to work through all of that. And then additionally, if you look at me, you probably won't notice this, but I've got this thing. I've got a deformity called pigeon chest, and it does literally nothing at all. It just makes my chest stick out a little further than it should in the middle. And also the doctor told me when I was 13 and I got, diagnosed. I went for a checkup and he said I had this thing. But when I was 13, he told me that it will cause me to burp really, really loud. Some of you are like, that's awesome. Some of you are like, that's awful. And depending on the room of people that I'm in, when I have to burp really loud, I agree. But it's a really insignificant thing. It doesn't really affect my life. The only way it affected my life when I was younger was that it caused me to look even thinner than I really actually was. And so, through all of that, the teasing, the appearance, whatever, all of this kind of created in me a really complicated relationship with body image, and also a kind of a complex curiosity about food and how it affected the body. I would watch my friends bring Happy Meals and Oreos in for lunch, and I would have carrots. And I didn't understand a whole lot about science or anything at that point in time. But what I did know was that what I had was healthy and it kept me thin, and that what they had was not healthy and it didn't make them thin. At some point, I, like Eve in the garden, developed a desire to have what I did not, which was access to food that was not particularly good for me, and a larger body than what I had. In high school, I developed a binge eating disorder where I would go through spurts of time when I would just compulsively eat large amounts of food to see if it could affect the appearance of my body. But I was in high school and my metabolism was pretty good. So I didn't really do any damage to the appearance of my body. However, what I did do was I developed some patterns of behavior that would continue to follow me long after high school. I'm not sure exactly when I would have been able to classify this behavior as addiction. I'm not sure what the certain point in the timeline would have been. But by the time I was in college, I definitely would have classified it as that. I'm a guy, I'm a man, I'm a male. I have wrestled with and to the glory of God, overcome the trap, the prison of pornography. I'm so grateful for that. The stronghold that I have had to wrestle with the hardest in my life is my relationship with food. I knew food before I knew porn, and food has made porn look like preschool. With all of that in mind, like most addicts, right? I would have these seasons where I would do like pretty good. God was gracious, and he would give me windows of months of time where it really wouldn't be much of an issue. My senior year in college, Alex and I started dating, and I was working out pretty regularly, which helped me kind of stave off my unhealthy behaviors with food for the most part. But as most addicts, I dealt with the normal triggers, stress, hurriedness, exhaustion. All of these things drove me towards the coping mechanism, which was food for me. And after I graduated from Grace College, biblical studies degree, youth ministry degree. I had every intention in the world of getting a job in ministry right away. That's a long story. That didn't happen. The long story short is that after a summer full of interviews at really promising prospective churches, by the time August rolled around, all of them had kind of fallen through in really bizarre ways, and I found myself graduated from college, no job, stuck in Warsaw, Indiana. Now, God used all of this to really clarify my calling into worship ministry. Now, with hindsight's 2020. With hindsight, it's like, man, he was so gracious to do it that way. But at the time, my plan had been to get a ministry degree and get into ministry. So I was very confused why it seemed like God had made this calling on my life. He had opened doors and then shut them, and now I was stuck jobless in Warsaw, Indiana, with no job in ministry. I ended up taking a job where I was commuting up to 90 minutes one way. So like an hour and a half after both ways. 90. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I was driving like an hour and a half every day, most days. This job was great. Stephanie Rager, who I don't even think is here, but most of you know her. She was like kind of my boss. It was honestly a great job, and I worked with amazing people, and I enjoyed what I did. However, the stresses that were going on in my life, the confusion, feeling displaced, all of that, and me being on the road a lot made me a frequent visitor of drive-thrus. And what started as convenience quickly turned into compulsion. And this is where things got really, really bad for me. I had that job for only a year, so it wasn't super long, but that year was long enough to establish a pattern of habits and behavior of eating fast food compulsively that followed me long after I was done with that job. Over the next few years, I fluctuated in weight quite a bit. I peaked probably about 50 pounds heavier than what I am right now. And at some point, honestly, not very long into that, at some point it ended up completely controlling my life. I would say that I was not able to stop. I'd find myself like finding ways to sneak in a trip to like Little Caesars or McDonald's or whatever. And I would argue with myself in the car. I would tell myself, I don't need to do this, I don't need to do this, but I couldn't stop myself. This was absolutely controlling my life. There came a season when I became aware of the fact that if I didn't stop, that if I didn't find a way to like control this thing, it would take me out. It would take me out of ministry, I'd be done. It was controlling me. I couldn't outrun it. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? I've asked myself a lot of questions in the years that have passed since then about that time in my life. There's one that I think is important for us tonight. The question is this: if I was pretty obviously not doing well, if I was visibly, like in public, eating things that weren't good for me. Like maybe even sometimes in quantities that were larger than I should have. If I was visibly fluctuating in weight quite a bit, if it was obvious that like something was off, why did not a single person ever ask me if I was okay? Why did no one ever say anything at all to me? You know, food's always been with us. It's always been a part of our lives. If you were born, probably on day 2, you started eating. But we kind of simply just experience it. And we don't often stop to think about maybe how God thinks about it. Instead, we choose the foods that make us the happiest. We never consider what might make us the holiest. We book our schedules to the brim because mealtime is not sacred, and we can get, a burger and fries in a minute on our drive from this thing to the next thing. We drink soda after soda to the point that, honestly, we probably can't stop even if we wanted to. We are Christians by name. We champion the idea of denying ourselves and carrying our cross and honoring God when it comes to our relationship, honoring God with our bodies, that we preach that we are Holy Spirit houses, that we are the temple of the living God. We talk about all of this. We are Christians by name, but when it comes to our relationship to food and drink, we are far closer to atheists and humanists. We say all things in moderation, but then we allow ourselves to define what moderation is. We have adopted and syncretized to the Epicurean philosophy of pleasure as God. Eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow you die. Do I have your attention? Let me give you some stats. This is just hard data. There's no agenda here. Between the years 2000 and 2018, eating disorders among young people went from 3.4% to 7.8%. That's more than double over the course of 18 years, and it got to almost 1 in every 10 young people. Since 2020, that number has increased to over 20%. That's 1 in every 5. Disordered eating can be defined on a spectrum. It can be binge, or it could be purge, or really anything in between. There's some new research coming out that has identified a new type of disordered eating. This is really fascinating. Because the rise in supply and popularity of processed foods, people's bodies are actually being trained to depend on processed food only, to the point where you can train your body to reject any natural food. This is real. You can eat enough processed food that your body will reject salad. It's not just that you don't want it, it's that your body will reject it. This is bad. This is an addiction. This is a real problem. People's bodies can't take in what is good for them. This is a real thing that's happening in our time. We look at it and we call that picky eating. And we say, oh, it's fine as long as they're eating something. Here's one. Did you know this? Kids aren't growing teeth. Have you heard this? This is a new thing. A real thing that kids are not actually growing they're not losing their baby teeth later in life because their diets aren't training, they aren't letting their mouths know that it's time for them to have moved on to adult food. The way that the mouth works is you eat proteins and harder foods and adult food. And that lets your mouth know, it's time to lose these baby teeth. And it's happening later and later and later into childhood. Kids aren't growing adult teeth because they're eating so much processed and soft foods. This is real. No agenda, this is just data. Here's more. 1 in every 5 children are obese, and it's 2 in every 5 adults. Data. This is a fun one, I guess. You are statistically more likely in America to be a millionaire than to have a six-pack. Did you know there are more people in this country walking around with $1 million+ than people with visible abdominals? And this one should hit pretty close to home in a room like this. Research conducted in 2011 showed that teenagers who are involved in the church are 50%, that's 1 in 2, more likely to become obese in adulthood. What? What? Why? Why did no one say anything to me? I think it's because no one saw anything that I was doing as a problem. I think it's because maybe collectively, just as a culture, we have a problem that no one has acknowledged as a problem. We don't think about food, we don't even consider how God thinks about food. We don't think about this stuff theologically. I would like to think about food theologically. Paul thought about food theologically. Let's talk about the Corinthian church. The Corinthian church was a church in the region of Rome called Corinth. Corinth, let me tell you a little bit about Corinth. It was this really fascinating place in the Roman world. Corinth was kind of this crossroads for a lot of business. So you had a lot of business running through Corinth, a lot of money traveling through Corinth. That's important. It also was a religious kind of epicenter, not Christian necessarily. There were several temples set up throughout Corinth for pagan Roman gods. That's important. In terms of like real life examples, what should you think of when you think of Corinth? I think of like New York City. I think of Los Angeles, like kind of at the forefront of culture a little bit, a lot of business running through, a lot of money running through. Really wealthy, really lost, right? That's Corinth. There are three things, but that all being said, I want to tell you three things about Corinth, but this is really important. The reason Paul was writing a letter to the church in Corinth at all is because by the grace of God, the gospel of Jesus Christ had broken into this pagan, lost, wealthy, spiritualistic, ritualistic culture. And that's amazing. But this church was full of a bunch of people who had all this baggage of spiritualism and business and pleasure. So there are three things that I think we need to know about the people who would have been in the church at Corinth who are receiving this letter from Paul. Number one, Corinth was pleasure obsessed. You hear stories about like the ancient Roman world, and especially the upper echelon, like the really wealthy, which would have been people in Corinth. And you hear about their parties. There's this fable. The parties really happened, and the parties almost certainly involved a lot of indulgence. Eat, drink, be merry, for tomorrow you die. In Corinth, they would have these lavish parties, and there's this fable. Some researchers have said it's a myth, but I think it paints a picture of the type of people who would have been at Corinth, where they say they'd have these lavish parties with a ton of food, and people would gorge themselves on food and then excuse themselves to purge the food that they had just eaten so that they could come back and gorge themselves some more. That's Corinth. Corinth was idolatrous, and that shouldn't be a surprise. This was a city filled with temples set up to pagan gods. Corinth was a city full of a lot of idolatry. As it relates to food, we find out that a common practice in Corinth was that food would be sacrificed and offered to idols. And it wasn't just like they would give a plate over to a pagan god. It was any food that you would maybe run into in a supermarket to like purchase, it was probably food that had been offered to an idol beforehand. This was common practice. For the people that were in the church at Corinth, more than likely all of them had spent their entire life just eating food that had been sacrificed to idols. That's just what their culture was. Third thing that I think is important to understand about Corinth is that it was selfish. They were a selfish people. We get to 1 Corinthians chapter 11, and Paul is talking to the church about their communion services. Now, those of us who are in the Grace Brethren Church, we have communion services. We come together. They're amazing. And we have a meal together. Now, Paul's talking about you guys in Corinth. You're coming together and you're having a meal. But this is how he describes their communion services. He says, you guys come together and you cut each other in line. and you take all the food and you gorge yourself on the food, and some of you are getting drunk. There's no food left for the people who are in back, like you're taking all the food for yourselves. And he says, I do not commend you for this. It's like, yeah, duh, it's horrible behavior. But this paints a picture, really, as it relates to food specifically, that Corinth was a very selfish place full of a lot of very selfish people. In 1 Corinthians 10, Paul gives us the words to address all of this. And he starts by looking at the Old Testament. So he looks at the story he draws from. You remember like the Exodus event, right? Like Moses leads all the people. They're going to go to the promised land, and then they mess up, and then they end up in the wilderness for 40 years. You know what I'm talking about? Yeah, you're with me. And because of that, they're wandering around the wilderness for like 40 years. And in the wilderness, there are places where there just is no access to food. So the people are like, oh, Lord, we need food. We need food. So get this. You guys know what he does. God sends manna from heaven. You know, manna, the stuff, it's like kind of like bread, maybe. It means, what is it? Now, listen to this. This is manna. It's a type of food that no one else in the world got to eat. It was made by God, and he rained it down from heaven. Like, that's cool. Are you picturing that? Like, no one else has ever eaten a food like that before. That's manna. It was a holy food. And the Israelites' response, they said, thanks, God. No. This is crazy. The Israelites' response, like Eve, is that they wanted the food the rest of the world had instead of what God had given them. And so Paul highlights that when he's talking to the Corinthian church. He's highlighting some of Israel's history in the Old Testament. And he says, starting in verse 6, now these things, why did they happen? They occurred as examples to keep us from setting our hearts on evil things as they did. These things happened so we wouldn't make the same mistakes. Don't be idolaters, as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink, and then they got up to indulge in revelry. Food was a source of horrific rebellion against God's intended purpose. Now, don't forget, it was also a wonderful gift when experienced the way that God intended it to be. That was the manna. But the Israelites chose to want what the rest of the world had instead, a source of horrific rebellion against God's intended purpose. He continues in verse 11, he says, these things happened as examples, and they were written down as warnings for us, the church. They were written down as warnings for us on whom the culmination of the ages has come. So if you think you are standing firm, be careful that you don't fall. No temptation has overtaken you except what has overtaken those who have come before us, except what is common to mankind. Humanity has been fighting with idolatry its whole existence. This is nothing new. As it relates to food even, Paul would say this is not anything new. But if you think that you are just fine, if you think you are standing firm, Paul says, look out. Paul says, make sure. The Israelites thought they were just fine too, but they were engrossed in idolatry. Look out. Then Paul continues to address eating the food sacrificed to idols. Paul says, sure. He says, sure you can. It's food. Food is food. You can eat the food sacrificed to idols, but why? Paul says, yeah, okay, but why? Why? Can you think about that? Why? And then he says, are you trying to make God jealous? And then we come to the defining statement that I think needs to inform how we approach everything in life. This is verse 23. And remember, this is written in the context of everything that I've just described. It's not exclusively about food, but food is certainly on Paul's mind as he's addressing this church. He says, all things are permissible, but not everything is beneficial. All things short of sin, they're allowed, sure. Go for it. All things are okay, but not all things are helpful. They may be acceptable, but that doesn't mean they're good. Every choice that you make is reinforcing the type of person that you're becoming, right? If you make decisions that glorify God, you are becoming the type of person who glorifies God. If you are either crucifying the flesh or you're reinforcing it. And you can reinforce the flesh, like that's fine. But why? I think Paul would say, why? Is there not a better option? Let's skip ahead a little bit into the chapter and we'll come back to those middle sections of verses. Verse 31, Paul says, whether you eat or you drink or whatever you do, do it for the glory of God. I said this, the more that you do to the glory of God, the more you will glorify God. The less you do to the glory of God, the less you will do to glorify God. There is a godly way, this seems to imply it, that there is a way to eat to the glory of God, and there's a way to drink to the glory of God, and there's a way to do whatever you do to the glory of God, which means implicitly that there's also a way to eat not to the glory of God, a way that does not glorify God, and drink in a way that does not glorify God, and to do whatever you do in a way that does not glorify God. And if that's not enough, I think it could be. We're purely right now only talking about the way that this stuff affects us individually, personally, but the middle chunk of verses talks all about how this affects our relationship to other people. Look at this, verse 23 or 24. It says, no one, okay, so let me give you the context. I'm sorry. He says, all things are permissible, not all things are helpful. No one should seek their own good, but the good of others. Eat anything sold in the meat market without raising questions of conscience, for the earth is the Lord's, and everything in it is the Lord's. If an unbeliever invites you to a meal and you want to go, go. Eat whatever is put before you without raising questions of conscience. But if someone says to you, this has been offered in sacrifice, don't eat it. So he kind of makes himself pretty clear there. Don't eat it, both for the sake of the one who told you and for the sake of conscience. I'm referring to the other person's conscience, not yours. For why is my freedom being judged by another's conscience? If I take part in the meal with thankfulness, why am I denounced because of something I thank God for? Food has been given to us, like every other thing, as an opportunity and a stewardship to love other people well. We look at this passage and we highlight that verse in there. It says, why is my freedom being judged by another person's conscience? And then we grow defensive while entirely missing the whole point of what he's saying. He's saying that to clarify, you do have the freedom, but in this case, in this scenario, you should give up your right in the pursuit of loving other people well. This passage is not about being defensive about what you are allowed to do. This passage is about loving other people more than what you love to do. And in case that wasn't already obvious, we get to verse 32, and he says, don't cause anyone to stumble. It's clear that Paul's focus is on loving other people well. Don't cause anyone to stumble, whether Jews, Greeks, or the church of God, even as I try to please everyone in every way, for I'm not seeking my own good, but the good of many, so that they may be saved. See, when we approach food purely selfishly, here's what happens. We hurt not only ourselves, We don't just reinforce our flesh. We don't just potentially quench the Holy Spirit and his influence in our lives, but we also miss out on the opportunities that God has given to us to think about others with food. Unfortunately, most of us look more like Corinth in our relationship to food than we look like Jesus. And we have not even entertained how to be holy in our relationship to food and drink. We've maybe at most entertained how to be happy. I think that it's time that we address and we change that. In my story, when I realized that this thing was going to take me out, I had two really significant experiences where God got my attention and he worked to free me. The first time was actually, it was at a night of youth group, and it was the end of the night, and I was walking back up the stairs in our gym building, up the stairs to the youth room, and I passed a student, and the student was crying, and I didn't know why, but we passed, and they were crying, and this really deeply affected me. I immediately had a sense that I was partially responsible for whatever happened. Now, to this day, I don't even know what happened. I'm not saying that I think it was my fault necessarily. Here's what I am saying. As I had this impression that I bore some responsibility, I got this sense, and I think this is what the Lord was trying to communicate to me. Any culture that you are a part of, you affect, especially in leadership, which I was in leadership. Any culture that you are a part of, any culture that you touch, you affect. And if you are not pure before the Lord, your impurity will bleed out into the culture that other people experience. If you're not completely serious about your holiness, it affects the other people around you. And so while the translation, crying student, not my fault. However, if I ever wanted to be a part of creating a culture where that kind of thing didn't happen, it meant that I had to get really, really serious about overcoming this issue. Otherwise, I was going to continue creating a culture where that sort of thing happened. That was the first thing. The second thing happened about 2 weeks later. I went on a solitude retreat with my wife, Alex, and I went on a solitude retreat with a mentor of mine, so the three of us. And my goal for the weekend was to spend a majority of the time praying to God about this specific issue that was controlling my life. I wanted to be free. I knew I needed to be free, otherwise I was going to be out of this thing. And on the first night there, after everyone had gone to bed, I got out of bed at about 11 p.m., and I was sick to my stomach for the entire rest of the night. I was in the bathroom, I was vomiting, I had diarrhea, gross, sorry, TMI, but it's important to the story. And around 4 in the morning, as I was still vomiting, I started praying, which I maybe could have done sooner. I don't know why it took me like 6 hours to get to that point. And I started praying, and I just asked God if he was trying to get my attention about anything, if that was the reason why I'd been up for, just sick. And immediately, this thought, clear as day, came to my mind. This thought was, this is what it's going to take to cleanse you and make you holy. I'm going to have to clean house. Well, I knew exactly what that meant. I knew that meant I couldn't approach this thing taking partial measures anymore. I couldn't want to be free, but only this much. It meant I was going to have to give up parts, give up specific foods and specific ways I interacted with food, and I would have to give it up completely and fully. So I prayed, I did, on my knees in the bathroom at like 5 a.m. I gave it to God, and listen, by the grace of God, I have been free ever since that day. And it's not just that I haven't returned to those habits. He's taken the cravings away. He's changed my desires. I'm free. And it's more than that. It's once I started to offer this over to God, his, I'm sorry, his grace is just so good. My wife and I, we have become really serious about eating well. We want to be good stewards of our bodies. And though I mentioned I had to give up a lot of other foods. Listen, I love food more now than I have ever in my entire life. Like I get to experience the way that God designed food, and it's beautiful. It's so much better than anything that I took in for most of my life. I love food more now than I ever did in my entire life, and it's because I see the design. I see the way that God you ever throw like a strawberry, or well, maybe more than one, maybe a handful, and a banana into a blender with some ice, and then just drink that? Like, I'm not talking about I'm talking about a strawberry banana smoothie, but not one that has like ice cream that you get from like, I don't know, Dairy Queen or whatever. I'm talking about like, you just throw a handful of raw strawberries and a banana into a blender with some ice and you drink that. That's insane, and God did that. Have you ever had a salad with like spinach and berries and almonds or walnuts, and if you're not allergic, that's obviously more appealing. But like, God did that. Like, you taste it and it's like, this is insanely good, but God made it that way. Like, there's all of these flavors that God created in his infinite creativity for us to not just eat and sustain ourselves, but to enjoy. That's a gift, and I'm living that. Like, I get to experience that, and it's so much better than anything that I ever had before. And as I have offered this part of my life to God, I have, I believe, become holier. Here's what I'd like to ask you to do. I would like to ask you to really honestly take an inventory. What decisions with food and drink could actually make you holier? Now, I'm not talking about excess and indulgence, gluttony. Like, that stuff is black and white. That's sin. That's never going to make you holier. I'm talking about, like, what are the decisions that you can make where it's less black and white that would just honor Christ more? Look at your life and really consider that. Sin only gives birth to sin. What decisions can make us more like Christ? Here's a question. Here's a few. When was the last time that you said no to a dessert? Like, on purpose? Just for purely the sake of exercising self-discipline, denying yourself. I think that you become more like Christ. If you do this to the glory of God and not to bolster some self-righteousness, if you do this to the glory of, I think you become more like Christ when you do that. When was the last time that you said no to a fast food run when all your friends were going? You know, because it was literally 11 o'clock and you don't need fake food at that hour, you need to go to bed. When was the last time that you did that? I think if you do that, and you do it to the glory of God, not for some self-righteousness bolstering, then I think you become more like Christ. How many of you have chosen to eat something healthy that you didn't enjoy much, but you knew it was better for you because you wanted to be a good steward of your body? Now, again, if you're doing this stuff because you want to look good, you want to be legalistic, that doesn't make you more like Christ. But if you do that because you want to be an honest, good steward of the body that God has given you, and you want to grow in loving the design that he has made, and you want to experience food the way that he designed for you to experience it, then when you do this, I think you become more like Christ. Here are some practical tips from my life. These are suggestions. This is not the Bible. These are just things that I have done that I promise will make you healthier. They'll make you feel better. And I think if you do them to the glory of God, they actually will make you healthier. Okay, you ready? Number one, slow down. Wait, I'm talking about food. Well, yeah. I don't think that we're thoughtful about food because we don't have time to be. We don't even have time to like go to the bathroom. That's why we check our emails and we send texts while we're sitting in the stall because we don't have time to take a break. And that's why we end up buying cheaper options or more convenient options or running through the fast food because we don't have time to be thoughtful about this stuff. We're in a hurry all the time. Slow down. You will also get less stressed out. I mean, there's a lot of benefits of this. But if you're really going to be thoughtful about the way that God thinks about food and your relationship with food and how it can make you holier, we've got to slow down to be thoughtful about this. So why don't you pray? Pray to God about it. Why don't you ask him that he would give you his heart for food? In fact, why don't we take a minute? And you can do that right now. Just go ahead and talk to God about this. Here's another thought. It's a suggestion. This is a tip. Try to work towards eliminating fast food out of your life. For me, this was a necessity. I felt like God told me that I had to do it. I'm not claiming that for anybody else, but here's some food for thought. My friend talks about intimacy and sex being this thing that God has designed as a beautiful gift for man and a woman in the confines of marriage, and it's a wonderful gift that was designed with a purpose. And then he talks about pornography and how that's the grossest counterfeit of what was meant to be beautiful. And he says, is fast food the porn of food? Something that was made to be beautiful and intentional and good. But these are some things, some true, not making it up. This is data about fast food. It has been designed by people. There are chemicals put in to keep you addicted to it so that you keep coming back. It's motivated by money. They just want your business. They don't care about you as a person. As a result, it is not good for you. It is damaging your body, which is limiting your effectiveness for the gospel of Jesus Christ. I legitimately think that this stuff, what I just described, is actually demonic. I genuinely believe that there are dark spiritual forces at play trying to keep the church less effective for the gospel of Jesus Christ through this stuff. So I would just ask you to entertain the thought. Can you work towards eliminating fast food from your life? Here's another one. Can you eliminate soda and maybe any sugary drinks? Here's data. These are just raw stats, no agenda here. Did you know processed sugar is actually 10 times more addictive than cocaine? And I think all of us would probably identify that cocaine is not a good thing. David Mathis, he's a writer, contributor of Desiring God. That's John Piper's ministry. He recently released a book called A Little Theology on Exercise. It's beautiful. It's a great book. It's short. It's under 100 pages. It's like pages are that big. Like, buy it. You could read it in an afternoon, and it's well worth the read. He writes for Desiring God, and he wrote an article similar titled A Little Theology of Sugar. Look it up tonight. It's a short read. You could probably do it in 7 minutes. Excellent stuff. But he includes some proverbs that talk about honey. Now, honey is natural sugar. It's not processed sugar. Processed sugar really wasn't much of a thing when Solomon was writing the Proverbs. However, he does provide some wisdom on how to interact with sugar. He says that honey is good, that it's sweet to the taste. It's a gift from God, and I agree. Again, this stuff, when used as designed, like this is a gift. It is a gift to taste ice cream. I know that that's processed sugar, but like it's a gift to taste like yogurt with some honey on it. Like sweetness is something that God designed for you to enjoy. That's Proverbs 24. It says that honey is a sweet thing, but then Proverbs 25, one chapter later, highlights the fact that too much honey is bad for you. That if it says, if you have be careful not to have too much honey because it will make you vomit. Now we have access to sugar far more powerful and far less genuine, far less authentic, and we are experiencing it daily in 12-ounce cans and gas station snacks, far beyond what Solomon would have warned against. So I would just ask you to entertain the thought and the idea. If you're thirsty, can you drink water? And if you hate water, just keep drinking it. It gets better. Landon, I wasn't planning on even saying this, but Landon just told me a couple weeks ago, he's like, I stopped drinking everything other than water. And what'd you say? It made you feel good? He lost weight, he feels great. Good job. That's great. I also drink pretty much exclusively water, and I like it a lot. And it makes me feel really good. So consider, one last thing. I talk about slowing down, I talk about being intentional. Consider meal prepping. This is just being thoughtful about what you're putting into your body. This takes time, this is work, this is a new rhythm for my wife and I, and it is hard, especially if you've never done it. It takes intentionality, but I would encourage you this way. Be in charge of what goes into your body. Don't let what goes into your body be in charge of you. That's called being a good steward. Some final thoughts. What's at stake with all of this? Dream with me. What would the church actually look like if everyone decided to live this way? So dream with me. I think we would be ready to say yes to any gospel call that comes our way. A lot that we would have to say no to right now if we didn't live this way. I think we would be better fathers, better mothers, better grandparents, better grandfathers, better youth leaders, better Sunday school teachers, whatever. I think we would be like Daniel and the exiles. Remember this story? When the rest of the king's servants, they were just eating the slop that the Babylonians ate. And Daniel and the rest of the exiles, they decided to eat what God had designed for them to eat. And what happened? They became the most valuable workers in the kingdom. Listen, I think our reputations would improve in the world. I think we would become known as better employees in the secular space. I think we would be known as better volunteers, as better neighbors, all of it. I think this would affect our public testimony. This is so countercultural, what we're talking about. No one's talking about this. This would set us apart visibly in a way in the world that would actually make us appear holy. To be able to say, yes, I'm doing this for God. Reg talked about revival this morning. He said, revival has always come through the church, and that's the design. And if we're to believe it's going to happen again ever, and I think it will have to happen through a pure church. So what if this is one of the last rocks that God needs his church to address before ushering in revival through a pure church? I can't guarantee any of that, but I can guarantee it won't happen if we don't pursue holiness in this area. This will take time. It is going to be costly. It is not going to be easy. We're going to need each other for accountability if we're going to do it at all, and we're going to need each other for encouragement, never condemnation, and never judgment. I love you more than I love what you'll do with this information. But we can do it. And listen, a lot is at stake if we do it. So let's do it. Let me pray. God, I want to say thank you for your church. Thank you. Thank you for your chosen people, that you love us, that you proved it through Christ on the cross, and that you have a design in mind for us to live a better way. I know that I still fall short in a lot of areas, and I'm not experiencing the fullness of the better way, the way that I will when I meet you face to face and everything will be right. But I want to the fullest of my ability while I'm here on earth, I want to live in every area of my life, fully concerned about what is the most holy. And I pray that for my friends, I pray that for your church. I just ask that we would be concerned about holiness above happiness, that we would want to serve you, that we would want to give you glory, that we would want to eat and drink and whatever we do to the fullest glory to God. And Lord, I pray that we would not be defensive about anything ever that is not holy, that is keeping us from eating or drinking or doing whatever we're doing to the glory of God. I pray that we would look like the church, the way that you designed it, that people would get saved, that there would be repentance, that widows would be taken care of, that the sick would be prayed for and taken care of, that the hungry would be fed as a result of your church being the church. And it's in Jesus' powerful name that we pray, the name that makes any of this worth it. Amen.